34. No, that's not me. That's an older one, I think. Move to trash. Move. I'm checking to see if I'm coming through. I'm sorry. Okay. I am. Golly. This has been. I'm sorry. I really am. I mean, 2 days in a row, everything was working. I didn't touch anything. I mean, I was very gentle with everything. I didn't touch anything. And then I realized that I had not updated my screen to show the proper number that we were on. I closed down OBS, reopened it. Cameras all gone. All cameras everywhere. This camera doesn't work. So I'm going to set that aside. Don't need that right now so that I can see better, actually. Whoa. Okay. We'll get that working later. I don't care. It's not that big of a deal. Just aesthetics. If I touch this wire, this camera is going to turn really hard, so I'm not going to touch anything. Okay. Let's get started. Welcome to session 34 of Through Theology in a Year, Theology Unplugged. I'm Michael Patton, and I'm leading you through Theology in a Year, all of systematic theology in 1 year. If you're just joining us, great, love it. I'm so excited you're here. Make sure that you go back and see other episodes. And make sure also you subscribe if you can to the Patreon. That's where I get my support. But you can go all the way back to all the other episodes and watch up until now. You can start right now. That's fine. I don't mind it. If this is your first time, you're going to enjoy it. It's not going to be, you don't have to have the previous sessions, but it's very, very valuable for you to go through the whole thing. I know I tell you that every time. I'm just repeating myself because it's important. It is that important. But today we are continuing our study. It's going to be an extensive study on essentials and non-essentials. Last time I introduced the subject, introduced the idea, the importance of the idea. Today I'm going to take it and I'm going to go through and show you kind of how we have the terminology we often use. And I think this will be helpful in understanding, delineating, and kind of more precisely articulating what it is we're talking about here, being able to articulate it in words and therefore articulate it in life. It's very, very important for us to understand the difference between essentials and non-essentials. I mean, it could be the most important part of this class because it's really freeing, very freeing in a way. One of the things that I deal with people, and you might know this, but I deal with doubters. I help people who doubt their faith and want to come back. That's the two things that are necessary: doubting your faith and wanting to come back. If you're doubting your faith and you're not wanting to come back, I will definitely talk to you. That's not the issue. It's just a whole different ball game. Whenever you want to come back, it is something that God is leading you through, an existential crisis, and it's usually a very, very big deal. It's a turning point in people's life. And one of the things is that will cause this very, very often. As a matter of fact, it's very seldom that I come across somebody who is going through this existential crisis and doubting their faith that has this view, has a proper understanding on how to distinguish the essentials of the Christian faith from the non-essentials of the Christian faith. Because here's what you do if you hold to everything as essential. You are building your faith as a house of cards. So it doesn't matter what we're talking about, whether it's six-day creationism, whether it is the authors who wrote every book of the Bible, whether it is whether or not Jonah is a kind of a poem or a fiction, a fictional history, or anything. I mean, all of these different interpretive issues we have in theology, if you're setting them up in your theology and they all have equal importance, once you pull one away, everything falls down. It's a string that pulls out of the fabric, and the whole fabric ends up going. It is a house of cards, better put, a house of cards theology. And I'm trying to teach you not to have a house of cards theology where you build your faith like a house of cards, because then one little thing gets taken away and the entire house falls, even the important things. And it's not that they fall and you quit believing in them, because whenever you have belief, what we will learn eventually is that this belief is from God, but it is this existential crisis that we'll go through whenever we realize that our belief is something that is built around our intellect, and our intellect is a very, very important aspect of our belief. And whenever our intellect falls apart, whenever we don't really believe the things intellectually that we believed before, we go into an existential crisis. And that is very good for people. I'm telling you, it's very, very good. We need to have that. We need to have the deconstruction of the house of cards so that we're not building our theology as a house of cards. And that is what we're talking about today. That is what we're talking about this entire session whenever we deal with the essentials and the non-essentials. So I hope you understand the importance of this. And I end up helping you through to build a proper foundation for your house, and then you can rearrange rooms. You know, you got the foundation, and then you can rearrange your house in a lot of different ways. There's some basics that go into a house, but at the same time, every house doesn't look the same. And I'm not trying to present a subjective view of all of theology, as we will see, but at the same time, I want us to understand there are things that are debatable. There are things that we're not sure of. There are things that you are wrong about right now that you will later be corrected on, and how you receive that correction is based upon how you have built your theology. Okay, big introduction. Back in the I think it was 1531. This was only about 10 or 15 years after Martin Luther nailed this 95 Thesis to the castle doors of Wittenberg. And he started what we call the Great Reformation in the 16th century that produced Protestantism as we know it today, and Roman Catholicism as we know it today became solidified. It was an incredible time. We've talked about this before, the Enlightenment, the Age of Reason, everything that happened at that time. Well, you had the production of the New Testament in Greek, and it was printed very quickly on the printing press. Within 100 years, it was all put together and printed. People were learning to read, and you had scholarship really on the rise in the general public. And so Martin Luther was one of those people. He became a monk, and he became very proficient in the original languages, the Greek and Hebrew, and came to a conclusion that the church had got some things wrong. He started a reformation, and that reformation was based upon two principles. Sola Scriptura, the scripture alone is our final authority, our ultimate authority, the infallible authority, and salvation or justification was by faith alone, not by works of the law, not by anything we could do. So those were the two main principles of the Reformation. And there was great Reformation all over. I mean, it spread all over Europe, all over the West, and you had great reformers popping up. One of those reformers was Ulrich Zwingli, and he was a Swiss reformer. He was really, really good, and he loved Martin Luther, but he disagreed with Martin Luther on some things. And so they came together. Another guy was involved, and I love this other guy. He is an unsung hero of the Reformation, an unsung hero of the Christian faith. It was Martin Bucer. It's spelled B-U-C-E-R, but pronounced like it has a T. Martin Bucer. Martin Bucer was a guy who was dedicated to bringing unity to the Reformation. You see, At this time, there wasn't Lutherans, there wasn't Calvinists, there wasn't all these different branches with theological branches within the church. And it was kind of fractured in a way because everybody was coming to their own conclusions and then reevaluating everything. Well, one of the things that was reevaluated was the Lord's Supper. The Lord's Supper. What did the Lord's Supper at the Mass? That's real big in the Catholic Church, the Mass, where you take the body and the blood of Christ. Whenever you follow Christ's commands to do this in remembrance of him. Well, at that time, the Catholic Church in the West believed in something called transubstantiation. That means, that's just a technical term, that means that the body and blood of Christ changed in their substance, not in their accidents. In other words, the actual substance has changed into the body and blood of Christ, so we are actually taking the body and blood of Christ, but what you see, what you feel, what you taste, what you put under a microscope doesn't change. That's transubstantiation. So it was a very technical way of understanding how it is that the bread brought body and bread, the bread and wine became the body and blood of Christ, even though everybody could tell that it was still wine whenever they drank it, still bread whenever they ate it. But it transubstantiated. Now, Martin Luther reevaluated that and did not believe that, but he did believe something very similar, very close, because he believed very much that the Lord said, "This is my body." And if it was his body, then Martin Luther believed it. Ulrich Zwingli, on the other hand, and hang with me because this story is important for what we're talking about. Ulrich Zwingli, on the other hand, did not agree with Martin Luther. He believed that whenever Christ said, "This is my body," he was talking about this being a memorial to Christ, something that symbolized Christ, something that we did in remembrance of him, not because it did anything substantial to us. It had no sacramental value. It didn't confer any actual grace. It was something we did in response to our belief, like baptism. Now, Luther had a different view of baptism as well, but Ulrich Zwingli and Luther battled about this through letters for a while, and Martin Bucer wanted the Reformation to come together. So Martin Bucer was a German as well. He wanted the Reformation to come together so much. He wanted it to be unified. He wanted it to be one. And so he got them together, and he said, "Hey, let's discuss this." Actually, it was somebody else, Prince, or I can't remember his name, but it was the leader of the prince, I think. I don't know, I don't think it was the emperor, but anyway, he got it together, and Martin Bucer was kind of a moderator between Zwingli and Luther, and they all got together in Marburg, and it's called the Marsburg Dispute, or Marsburg colloquially. And they got together and discussed this. And here's what happened at that dispute. And then I'm going to tell you the legend of what happened, that we don't know whether this happened. But here's what happened. They agreed. They were able to moderate and agree. And they were about to reform. I mean, the Reformation was about to be united. The Swiss and the Germans, great Reformation that was produced from two incredible and charismatic leaders. Very smart leaders as well, theologically. And if they could come together, the Protestantism may look different than it does today if this would have ended better. But they agreed on 14 of 15 points of theology. So they went down and they agreed on they agreed on so much. But there was one thing they disagreed about, and Martin Luther would not give this up. Martin Luther believed very, very strongly that the body and blood of Christ was in, with, and under the actual element. It didn't become, so he didn't believe in transubstantiation, but he did believe in something similar. There was actually the body and blood of Christ. It was a real presence to Martin Luther. Christ, that was really Christ's body and blood, but the way he explained it was that it didn't turn into it in substance, but Christ's body and blood was in, with, and under the elements, the bread and the wine. And that's called consubstantiation. Martin Luther believed that, Ulrich Zwingli believed in the memorial view, that it was done in remembrance of Christ. That's the reason why we take the body and blood. And they battled that out, and it became such a substantial issue, even though they agreed upon 14 points of 15, this 15th point separated them. This 15th point was that important. And really, unfortunately, Martin Luther was an incredible guy. He was used in incredible ways. His personality was bombastic. He was out of control. He was kind of like, if you could compare him to today, maybe he was just kind of the Trump of today, that people were scared of in a way, and people had very different opinions about him. But he was used substantially because he was needed in that way. He needed that personality. So in some ways, while I criticize him objectively, subjectively, I understand why God probably used him and why he probably disagreed, because he was very strong. He was very self-assured. And so they disagreed about that, and they could not unify the Reformation. Now, as the story goes, this is from secondary information, but I don't know if it's true or not, but Martin Luther, while they were talking, pulled out his knife and carved into the table, Hoc est corpus meum. Hoc est corpus meum. That means, this is my body in Latin. He said, they got into it so much, Martin Luther pulled out his knife and carved that into the table and basically was saying, I'm not changing. This is carved in wood here. And that, if Christ said that, that's what I believe. That, by the way, that's kind of what that phraseology is where you get this hocus pocus from, to change into something. It's magic. But, they didn't think of it as magic, of course, so I don't want to misrepresent. But anyway, that is the importance here that we're talking about. Was that really an essential? Was that essential that the Reformation that almost came together and they agreed on everything else, on salvation issues, authority issues that were of great import for their theology, but they could not agree on that last thing. And that last thing, from Martin Luther's perspective, and Zwingli was pretty tough himself. I'm not saying he was any lightweight, and I'm not saying he wasn't bombastic. Butzer was the moderator there. He wanted both of them kind of just say, hey, this is not an essential. Okay, this may be important, very important even, but it's not essential for our faith or essential for our fellowship. They disagreed, and they went their ways. And we need to be able to figure this out ourselves. I'm taking you guys to Marsburg, and I'm going to take out all of the points of theology and say, let's get into this. But let's all let's all have the attitude of Martin Butzer rather than Martin Luther or Zwingli. As much as we love them, let's decrease the temperature in order to look at this in an objective way. Okay, hopefully that was a good enough introduction for this session. Now, what we're going to do today is we're going to look at some terminology on how we have looked at it, and then look at some more consequences. Terminology first. Oh, wait, let me get the PowerPoint up. Terminology. Okay, let me show you a few ways in which we talk about this. Often, it's essentials and non-essentials. You probably have heard that many times. What is essential and what is not essential? That is the most common way to refer to this. It can be referred to as dogma, doctrine, and opinion. Dogma is that which you do not give up. Doctrine is that which you hold to. And opinion is just something you have freedom in. I like that. That's really a good way to put it. Let's see here. Cardinal doctrines and peripheral doctrines. That's another good way to put it, and that's often the way we see it. How about this? Heresy and heterodoxy. Now, that gives you a little bit tighter understanding of what we're talking about, but heresy has to do, if you are a heretic, you have denied an essential, a central cardinal doctrine. If you believe in heterodoxy, if you are holding to something that is heterodox, then you disagree with the history of the Christian church, what everybody has always agreed on, but it's not an essential. I think that's another good way to look at it. Let's see here. The Great Tradition, capital T tradition. This is sometimes the way Catholics will look at it, Roman Catholics. You got the capital T tradition, you got the lowercase tradition, and then you got the heterodoxy and heresy. You got fundamental and non-fundamental. That's another way, the fundamentals of the Christian faith. That was in 1920, whenever a group of theologians got together to respond to the liberalism that was on the rise in the church of those days, and they wrote the fundamentals, that series of pamphlets, those series of small books that came out, the fundamentals, and then eventually that's where fundamentalism came from. Fundamentalism started as a very good thing because what they wanted to do was say, what were the essentials? What was the foundation of our faith? And let's get that down and figure out the non-negotiables. So this was done in 1920, what we're doing here. The Marsburg Table was done as well. People have done this before. We need to do this as much as we can in our mind while we're doing theology. Primary doctrines, secondary doctrines, and tertiary doctrines. Those are the third area doctrines. Core doctrines and peripheral teachings, non-negotiables, and indifferent matters, or things indifferent. You'll find this in church history. You'll find them talking about the adiphoria. That's the word that will be used very, very often whenever they're talking about indifferent matters. That usually has more to do with just practice, how you're living type thing rather than doctrine, but it can be applied to doctrine as well. We're going to have to kind of wrestle with that pretty soon also. The things that you have in the things in practice compared to the things in doctrine. What things are essential not to do in the Christian faith, and what things are essential not to believe, or in other words, reverse, what things are essential to do in the Christian faith. As a Christian, you have to do them, and what things are essential to believe. Now, we believe that there's nothing you have to do to become a Christian. That's very important to reemphasize. There's also here salvific issues and non-salvific issues. That's a very simple way to put it. Primary beliefs and secondary beliefs. Theological triage. This is done by what's his name? Gavin Ortlund, I think is his name. He's really, really good. He's a great, on YouTube, if you watch anything from him, Gavin Ortlund, I believe it is. He's written a book. I got the book and I read through it. It's kind of a simple book. I don't think he goes through it as in detail as I would have liked, but at the same time, I really love his attitude. If you want to see somebody that is Irenic, you want to see somebody that's at the Marsburg dispute table as Martin Bootser, that guy is doing it. He is doing such a fine job. As a matter of fact, I'm impressed enough with him to say that he's doing it better than anybody else on YouTube, including me. He's very, very good, and it's his purpose. His purpose in life is to live this out, to be the Martin Bootser. So that's a guy that I would encourage all of you to go listen to him. Doctrinal hierarchy. That's another way. That's the way that. Excuse me, I didn't put the PowerPoint up, but this is the way that I learned it first, kind of the revelation. I kind of had it in my mind some. I think we all do. But whenever I was reading this in the Survivor's Guide to Theology, doctrinal hierarchy was what was used, and it was a great example. So if you want to have a book that has an example from a scholar, James Sawyer, he's a great scholar, great guy, I know him very well. And I've talked about him before, but the book, A Survivor's Guide to Theology, it really works through a lot of these introductory prolegomena matters in a way that I think is very balanced, and it'll change the way you think, properly change the way you think. It won't change your foundation, because he believes the same thing we believe very, very much, but he's a Martin Bootser as well. Okay, things of first importance and things of secondary importance. That's another way. And then I like this one. This one's a very practical way to put it, and I think this is the way that most people would look at it in the church in some sense. Maybe not with regard to belief, but with practice, but still, this is a good way to put it. You've got salvation issues, you got fellowship issues, and you got things that we separate over, separation issues. And we're asking the question, when do we separate from somebody? Maybe even mentally, we say, you know what, I know that guy isn't a Christian because he doesn't believe blank. What things are there? I mean, is it, I know that guy's not a Christian because he doesn't believe that Jonah was a historical book? That's a tough one. I mean, what in the gospel tells you that? I know that he isn't a Christian because he believes the first 11 chapters of Genesis are not literal. No, where do we go? How do we get there? I don't mind it. Listen, if you can defend that, if you can truly defend that, then fine. Sit at the Marsburg dispute table and defend that. But I think you're acting more like Luther at that point. And not bad to be called Luther, but at the same time, he did wrong then. Okay, here's some charts that I look at to take what I have told you just now and put it into chart form, because you know I love charts. I have to have charts going. So here's the chart. And by the way, if you guys ever want the PowerPoint for this, if you are a Patreon, you can get the PowerPoint. Let's see here. Can I get that back up? If you're a Patreon, you can get on there and then just ask me for it, because you got the text where you can text me on that. But ask me for it. I'll put it together for you and send it to you. I mean, right now, it's a work in progress. It really isn't. It's somewhat of a mess, but you may say, hey, I really like these slides, so I want to grab a hold of some of those. And if you're not a patron, I'm not saying I'll only give it to you if you're a patron. I'm just saying that's a real easy way to get in touch with me. Otherwise, you're going to have to come to Facebook. You're going to have to come to, I don't know, Twitter. I don't check. I mean, I do look at Twitter, but I never check messages on that. I only sometimes check messages on Facebook. So that'd be the best way. But if you're on Patreon, I do check with all my patrons. I see what they're saying. I look quite often on there. And I'm getting better at that. If you're a patron and you're laughing, saying I don't. Okay, let's look at these charts. Okay, here's one. Look at this. In the middle, you got heresy. You get that. We already talked about that. Secondly, you got heterodoxy, right? And then you got who caresy. I don't know. I came up with that. That's not good. I know it's terrible, but hey, it's fun, right? Heresy, heterodoxy, and who caresy. That's a good way to put it. Okay, how about this? Doctrine and dogma, you see how it goes. In the center circle, the most primary are those things that are most important. And then as we go out, it's less important. Here's tradition with a capital T, the great tradition with a lowercase t, and tenet and toleration. I think that's what I meant to put on that last one, but this is really good. These are just keeping it T's. Tradition, tenet, and toleration. So, that's another way. Here's what it looks like with primary, secondary, and tertiary, first, second, and third. Salvation issues, fellowship issues, and separation issues. That's the last one we ended with. I put these up here just so you can see what I'm talking about and how this circle works. Now, you got this term that was introduced it was in the early 2000s with Brian McLaren. He wrote a book called Generous Orthodoxy, and I really appreciated a lot of that book. I really did. I thought he wrote it well. I thought many of the criticisms that he had of the church was very well founded, but he goes in a completely different direction than I do. He starts and he gets into this area where we need to deconstruct and rethink, but he never really, his generous orthodoxy is too generous. It becomes too generous and says, I mean, there's some way in which you can take this idea of Irenics. We're talking about being Irenic, being peaceful. That's the key word for everything I do, is I want to make sure not only am I being Irenic, but also I'm teaching Irenically, and I want you guys to be inspired to be Irenic, because this is what we have to do in order to represent. Christ was very, very Irenic, but at the same time, he really was hardcore on the main truths. And I think sometimes you can get in this idea of Irenics, and you get around a fellowship of people that are deconstructing with you, and they all think you're so great for not being like the hardcore fundamentalists before, and you feel it, and you're like, yeah, this is really good, this is very unifying, and you get addicted to the unity. And the unity becomes your primary focus, not finding the truth and seeing that truth as being something that we unite around and celebrate, but the unity is just for the sake of unity. The unity is what we are celebrating, not Christ. And our celebration comes from our unity in Christ, but the unity itself becomes celebrated. And I think I found that too much with him. And I'm not sure where he's at now. I just know the direction he was going then. So that is one thing that you can look at. Okay, here's what, well, like I said, we're going to have to deal with this. The difference between belief and practice whenever it comes to this chart. Remember, this chart is what we're going to be building out. We're going to be building it out from the sense of essential for salvation and onward. And we're going to be talking a lot about that. But we also have to think about it in such a way as essential for the Christian life. Like I said, for us Christians, we do not do anything to become saved. So it's a tricky place we got to get into when we're saying, what does a Christian do and always do? Or is there something that a Christian does and always does? Reverse, what is a Christian can't do and always do? And if he is truly a Christian, and what makes him not a Christian? That's a tricky one, because within our practice, there isn't really anything we could say. I mean, like, you could say, well, let's put the worst thing up there, murder. A Christian does not murder, and if he murders, then he is not really a Christian. And then you got problems because you got David being one of God's people. So I think it's harder to put it into that chart, but at least what we're doing now can illustrate a way in which we are trying to emphasize celebrating around the essentials and giving grace in the non-essentials. Okay, so what we have here is this chart once again. I'm not going through this chart specifically today. Again, I'm just introducing the big picture of it all. We've gotten into some specifics, how it is the terminology is and why it is we should do this and the consequences of not doing it, which I'm going to emphasize more in just a minute. But this chart here is how we're doing it. So essentials for salvation. This is the way that I constructed my chart. I think it's a very good way to do it. Essentials for salvation, essentials for traditional orthodoxy. So in that point, what is traditional orthodoxy? That simply means what is essential for being a Catholic? What is essential for being an Orthodox? What is essential for being a Protestant? Those are the great traditions of the Christian church. But that's different because you go out a little bit more. If you zoom out on this chart, you have essentials for denominational orthodoxy. Now, that's within Protestantism. That's whenever you're talking about what is essential, what makes you a Baptist. What is it if you do not do, you're not a Baptist? What is it if you do, you're not a Baptist? That's the type of thing, right? So there are essentials for traditions of the Christian faith, and there are essentials for individual denominations, like a Baptist. For instance, believer's baptism is an essential. If you do not believe in believer's baptism, you're not a Baptist. Now, some Baptists would put themselves in that center circle, and that's what we're going to have to deal with. Just like Martin Luther put what he put in the center circle. Okay, and then you got things that are important but not essential, and there are very important things, but they are not essential, and they don't have to do with any of these traditions. Maybe you could say the author of the book of Hebrews, that's important, but it's not that important. I mean, It's somewhere in between not important and important. I mean, well, really, I would say it's important in a general sense. But anyway, that's an example, or another example would be who authored the Pentateuch. Was it Moses, or was there editors and redactors that came later? That's important, but it's not essential. And then you got things that are not important at all. What kind of sling David used whenever he sling the rock at David. Did the rock kill Goliath on impact, or did cutting off his head kill Goliath? That's not really important. I mean, it's interesting. It is. And it's not pure speculation, but it fits that category. And then you got pure speculation. And I always use, did Adam and Eve have a belly button? That's kind of a fun one. It's pure speculation. Who knows? Somebody asked me today, why did God create freckles? And I said, I really don't know. I mean, it could be because he likes variety and, all kinds of things, but it's pure speculation, right? Based upon what we know on the outside about God, but it's not anything it's the furthest out there. That kind of thing should cause you least to doubt your faith. Okay, and then, we got I repeat, the sine qua non. I want you to get that down, the sine qua non. This is the sine qua non of our faith, the without which not. Now, briefly, I know I'm out of time here, but briefly I want to talk about this. How focusing on other issues can limit your influence. And I got to be careful here, okay? I don't want to spend too much time, but I got to be careful. Whenever I say this about these people, I'm bringing up examples, and I hope you see it in the right spirit. I'm not saying anything about their salvation. I'm just saying how they are known and why they are known this way. Okay, let me just do this real quick, okay? So you got first Brian McLaren. Brian McLaren is the guy I talked about beforehand. He is known for his deconstruction of the Christian faith, and he was a leader in what's called the emerging church back in the early 2000s. And I was very interested in the emerging church. I kept up with it very much because I liked the deconstruction. I didn't like them not reconstructing, because that's what we do here. We deconstruct and reconstruct. But Brian McLaren is known for that. That's all he talks about is this generous orthodoxy. He's known only for that. He's not known for his rigorous defense of the central elements of the Christian faith, or repeated statements about that, or even just saying, hey, listen, this is what we're talking about here, but this is what is essential. I'm not saying he doesn't believe that. I'm just saying this is what you become known for whenever you focus on secondary issues too much. Another one is Rob Bell and the existence of hell. That's what he focused on. That's all he was known for. That's all he really wrote on for a while. At least that's what he was really, really popular about, and everybody was talking about him, and that's what he was speaking about, going on speaking engagements, and he was talking about kind of this universalism, or the non-existence of hell, that everybody will eventually make it to heaven. And that's the problem is, I'm not saying he's not saved because of that, okay? You may be surprised that I say that, but I can't say you're not saved because you think everybody's going to eventually get to heaven. That's not part of the gospel, is saying, do you believe that there is a hell and that it is real and that it is painful and that people go there, something like that, or the majority of people go there, or something that gets further and further outside the circle. It's important, very important, but it's not essential. But that's what he was known for, and that's unfortunate. You don't want to be known for a secondary issue. You've got John Hagee here, who's known for just prophecy, and he believes that if you do not believe like him in prophecy, you cannot be saved. Creationism, Ken Ham. I like Ken Ham fine. I mean, don't get me wrong, and I know a lot of you guys love Ken Ham, but I don't like how not dedicated, that's not what I'm saying here, but how he doesn't allow, how assured he is about his position without understanding the tensions that are there, and that many good people disagree with him, and to let that rope loose a little bit more whenever he's talking about 6-day creationism. I don't mind 6-day creationism. I don't know whether it's true or not. I really don't. I mean, it could be true, or maybe that God created things in millions of years, and even used evolution to do it. I know that surprised you for me saying that. It's not what I believe. I'm just saying it's not part of my essentials. And whenever I look at Ken Ham, it really does seem like it's a part of his essentials. James White, I have him crossed out here for Calvinism, and Tremper Longman for politics, and Mark Hitchcock for pre-tribulationalism. And all I mean by this is James White is close, but oh, excuse me. Let me put that up there. James White is close to being identified with Calvinism. However, I cross him out because I say he does focus on the gospel. He really does. And I do think he has a really, really good heart. I love his heart. He's just kind of hardcore, and he seems to be necessary in this area to some degree. I agree with him on most of his theology. I just don't really agree with him on his attitude, and I almost identify him with that attitude, and I think most people do as well. In politics, the reason why I put Tremper Longman is because Tremper Longman, he's a great scholar. He really is. Old Testament scholar. You don't get many better scholars. As a matter of fact, he's the one I chose to have come teach the Old Testament theology at the Credo House. He's the one that we have on audio teaching that. He does a great job. However, for some reason, people got into politics in 2016, and there was a big division that happened. And you know the division that's there. It's just humongous. And if you jump into that fray and take too hard of a position, too hard line of a position, number one, and talk about it too much, number two, you're going to be identified with that. And the problem is Tremper Longman on his Facebook has been posting so much, and he's angry about a certain person and doesn't like this person, and he's in politics. It's all about politics. And then he wrote a politics book. And I'm just like, oh, he's so close to being, I just identified with that, and that's not good. And then I put up here pre-tribulationalism, and I put Mark Hitchcock. I know Mark Hitchcock very well, and he's very, very good at pre-tribulationalism and at pre-millennialism. If you want the best of the best, that's where you go to. As a matter of fact, that's the guy that we had come teach. He's very close, but he's not there. That's why he's crossed out. Same thing with Tremper Longman. They both have an Irenic spirit. They really do. Deep down, it's just that whenever you focus on something, I want you to beware. You're going to be close to be identified with that something rather than the central elements of the Christian faith. Now, one more thing, okay? One more thing, and then we're done. I'm sorry, taking long. This is an important thing. Let me show you how. Let's see here. How focus? Why does it say limit? I say expand. Well, anyway, here's people I have, and I don't have them crossed out, but I have them as examples. These are 4 examples of people that I believe are very strongly Irenic and great scholars. I mean, I really look up to these guys. You talk to them, and they'll have this exact attitude. Dan Wallace is one of the greatest guys on the planet, maybe the greatest guy on the planet at putting together the text of the New Testament. It's all he does. But he has such an incredibly gracious spirit whenever it comes to theology. So does Rob Bowman. He's an apologist, and he battles. He's an example of somebody who can battle it out. He battles it out with Jehovah's Witnesses and Mormons, and that's what he focuses on. But at the same time, man, he is such a gracious person. He really is. He comes across very well. Ed Komashevsky, the same way, great scholar on the historical Jesus. He's this way. Tom Schreiner, a great scholar on the New Testament. And the reason why I put these examples down is because it's very interesting to me that scholars have this attitude, it seems, more than here. It is easier to find scholars who are Irenic than it is to find pastors and authors who are Irenic. Why is that? That's the question I have. Why is it that scholars are often more Irenic than pastors or authors or popular speakers? Scholars are digging deep all day. You would think that those people were the most sure. That's all they do. They teach classes at seminary. They study. They write books on a certain book of the Bible or a certain translation. It's all they do. You'd think they would be the most hardcore and they would be the most divisive. But it's the exact opposite. I'm telling you the truth. I've been in both worlds. I know both worlds very, very well. I've known it for 25 years, and I've seen it, I've learned it, and I have taken this in and pondered it a lot. And one of the things, let me put this up here. Why are they less likely to break fellowship unnecessarily? Let me give you some illustrations. Because they're scholars. They read broadly. They have to read broadly. How about this? Because they fellowship broadly. Whenever you're reading broadly and you fellowship broadly, you're having to reach out to other people. There's an internal kind of criticism that goes on within scholarship. It's a peer-reviewed type attitude that you have to take. And whenever you have that, you understand how your work can be criticized and how you might be wrong because you have before. And you've got great other scholars who are criticizing you. They have to know the past. Whenever you're a scholar, you have to not just know what's going on today, you have to know the scholarship of the past. Whenever you're broadening your perspective, let me tell you something. Here's the key of what I'm getting at. Whenever you're broadening your perspective, whenever you're fellowshipping more broadly with other people who at least claim to know Christ, then all of a sudden you are going to have to start molding your opinion. You're going to have to either say this person is not saved, and I believe he's not saved because he doesn't believe in the Lord's Supper the way I do, or the pre-tribulationalist rapture, or the 6-day creation, or you're going to have to fellowship with this guy who loves Christ, who talks about Christ, but disagree with you, and change your mind. Whenever you're a scholar, you have to fellowship more broadly, and it changes you. You start to see, like I did whenever I was sitting next to that charismatic person who I thought was demon-possessed at the beginning, but then realized even though he was charismatic, he was a better Christian than me. That was a big turning point in my life with regard to this. They recognize the difficulty because they study so deep. They recognize the difficulties and tensions in many areas, and they have captive students, not a fickle audience. That's very important. I mean, it really is. You have captive students. They have to be there. Whenever you're pastoring, oftentimes you begin to preach in order to keep people there. And let me tell you something. Listen to this. The more divisive you are, the more you're catching yourself on fire, the more people will come to watch. The more people like that. People don't necessarily like Irenic spirits. I mean, they do in general, but at the same time, if you want to get a big audience and you want to get it fast, start criticizing people, start separating, start drawing the lines in the sand everywhere. People are bad part of ourselves. We like that. We click on that. That is clickbait to us. And whenever you're a pastor, sometimes you get that attitude where you need to be a clickbait type pastor, where there's something about you that is unique, strong, and very, very bombastic, like Luther and like Zwingli were. Martin Bucer would not draw an audience automatically. It would take time. And this is kind of a different way of looking at it, I think. They seek the truth first, not a responsive audience. That is what scholarship is, at least most scholarship. I'm not saying all of it is like that, but most scholarship does seek the truth. That is what they are after, not a audience, they're not trying to be popular. They're just trying to be correct and contribute something in the history of the church, leave something behind that is significant. Okay, guys, thank you all so much. I'm sorry I went so long, but I had to get through all of this. This was very important. As you could see, I was very excited about it. I am very excited about it. I'm very excited about you being here. I really am, because this is so incredibly important for our faith to have this Irenic attitude and to find the sine qua non of the Christian faith, the without which not. If you're able, go over to my Patreon, become a patron. Support what I'm doing. That's how I get my support. Thank you for that, for all of you that do. And if you can't, just go over there and subscribe. You could subscribe for free and follow, but even if you don't do that, thanks for showing up. I really do appreciate it, and hopefully this was beneficial for you. I will see you next time.